So welcome back. Today's video won't be terribly long, but I do think it is actually quite important. So today I'd like to go over one of the most central topics in research, which is, of course, I've chosen, of course, to title this lecture something slightly different, namely, as you can tell, of course, these are matters of important science. So without further ado, let's dive into them. So of course, one of the fundamental questions would even be, what is this conversation? And in science, funding is pretty quintessential. Okay. Science would be great if everyone just got to ask every question they'd like to explore fully with all the tools they ever possibly needed. That can't happen. There are limited resources, limited institutions, limited labs. And so a huge part of how we decide what science is worth doing and not doing is asking who's got the money to actually do their research. And this, of course, has already led to a huge problem, as you can tell, which is to do science requires money. So maybe the most important questions to ask aren't actually getting asked. And this becomes an ethical issue, which we'll discuss at length in this class at another time. That's not the point of today's class, though. Today's class is to focus on a different question, which is really fundamental. How do I, as a researcher, begin to get funding for the research I'm going to do? So I want to dive into that briefly today. All right, so actually before we dive in, I suppose we need to address a specific question, which is, what even is a grant? And that's actually pretty fundamental to science. So a grant is a carte blanche. They hand you money, you do science, and report what happened. No. A grant is much more direct than that. A grant says, here's what I am going to do as a researcher. And it has value for these reasons, and these are what I need. Maybe I need researcher time. So if I'm a PhD, I need some undergrads to help me carry this out. Or I need this instrument because my university, none of the supporting universities in my system have it. And without this instrument, I cannot solve this question. This question matters to society, right? It's a much more pointed argument than that, asking for specific things. And people do give money to that kind of research. And I'll explain why in a moment. Now, if people give money to that kind of research, they do expect something in return, and normally that is publication of journal articles and presence at symposiums and things like that, where you are supporting this company or government in their endeavor to develop a new product or to provide some societal greater good or whatever be it. Now, there are two major sources of grant money. One, of course, is federal, and one, of course, is private. So I can get money from the government or from a company, and there's of course gray areas in here from like academic institutions, which may be not for profit, but also not giving me money from a governmental grant. But let's focus on these two things for now, just a government institutional or institutional money and private money. They're very different. Private money generally seeks to do something like, can we make a medicine? Can we develop a new product? Can we bring something that will bring money back to our company stakeholders and those kinds of questions? And as you can guess, most scientists aren't huge on that kind of a question. We're not in this to get rich or make other people rich for the most part. Governmental grants ask, what can we do to answer big questions that are helpful to the human race and to society? And that sounds a lot more like the things that get people interested in science. And there's a lot of money there because, well, governments have a decent amount of money, at least in our country, and we do have a strong research base. So effectively, you're going to come to an organization and say, I would like to do this research, and here's what benefit it carries, and here's what I need to do it. And they're going to read those things and determine if it fits their mission or not. As you can tell already, this becomes a sales pitch. You need to sell what you're doing to an external person to show that it has value to you, to society, and to them. It's difficult. I want to go through a few things here. So this is actually the application guide for getting money through the NSF, which is the largest granting organization they are. And if you look, it's a nice lengthy 50-page document. And I will tell you that most researchers in the academic world would be highly familiar with everything here. Why? Because when it comes to doing science, getting grants has to be part of the process. If you're an undergraduate, you're doing research for a professor who got a grant and is helping you ask the right questions. If you're a graduate student, maybe you're in the business of trying to get grants, or certainly fulfill the obligations of a grant. And if you're a professor, well, then you're probably in the business of keeping your lab open. And all these things require continual granting. And the process is supposed to work something like this. You get a grant, you get money, and do research and publish your results, right? That's what I just said up top. And what actually happens in practice is quite different. Okay, realistically, what you do is you get grants for what you've done so that you can do some open research. And this game that gets played is so incredibly common. I'm not saying every single grant goes that way. I'm not saying that everything's broken. But just like most of the scientific method, what we say actually happens and what's done in practice tends to not be exactly congruent. Now, when I'm talking about these kinds of things, what really matters to us today is who's giving this money and what is it that I need to present to them so that they may consider my research worthy? That's the question that I'm introducing. And we're not going to answer that in one 25-minute video. We're not going to answer that in a high school class, but we can broach the topic. So in the United States, it'd be remiss for me not to start off by talking about the National Science Foundation. They are the biggest granting organization probably in the world and certainly in our country. Okay, NSF is a spot where we fund scientists as taxpayers. And I want to point out that this is a massively useful website to you later on in your life, but right now it doesn't really matter because you're not going to apply to an NSF grant. Now, they have money. If you read their most recent budget request, you'll see they have $6.5 billion, which is actually a 12% decrease in the last 2 years. That does with political climates in our country and how we deal with intellectualism. That being said, $6.5 billion is a lot of money. It's a lot of money. And it is competed for by tons and tons of researchers. Okay, we're talking thousands of research grants. And these grants aren't like, I need $50 because I'm out of copper sulfate. We're talking about, I need to build a lab to build out an actual question. I want to look at what they're funding because I think it's interesting. Now, we're talking about NSF. That's not the only show in time. As a matter of fact, I've never directly gotten a grant from the NSF. I suppose I've been supported from and had research cut by NSF grants. But generally, if you're working with NSF, you're working at a pretty high level. Obviously, at a high school, you're not going to make an NSF application. But I still want to talk about it because I think it's worth a point. So bringing that back in, I think it is worth saying this money exists. However, since the Apollo program here, the amount of federal money available has been slowly declining even while our budget has been, sharply increasing. So this is something of a concern within the academic community. And if you talk to most researchers, this chart here comes up pretty frequently because, well, NSF does fund so much research. If you wanted to, you could find a website that looks like this that talks about, well, what's been done already. So if I want to look up at all the research that's been done on tornadoes, immediately I can find what's been done, how much they got paid, and who did it, which is pretty interesting. And, I can look at my own research, if I can spell. And you could come in here and say, oh, look, we got a decent amount of money, right? $271,000. Great. What happened with that? Well, this is way before you even went to college, Mr. Nendick. Well, barely. I'm actually old. But you get the idea. Now, what's interesting here is, hey, they need an abstract. Now, that abstract goes on and asks, hey, what's the larger merit? How does this impact people? But you can probably guess this thing I've been having you start to learn how to do. does play a role. It turns out scientists speak in terms of abstracts. Why? Because they're the simplest form, most condensed form of their research. So if you go to any grant on this page, you'll find an abstract, which isn't surprising. So if the gears are turning in your head yet, I'm going to make you write a grant at some point in this process, and you're going to start with a research proposal in the form of an abstract. Shocking. Now, you can go through the website yourself. That's not something I'm going to ask you to do, but if you come through, you will find the kinds of abstracts that get awards. And so let's say if I'm interested in asking a tornado question, just because that's who I am, and I don't know, collaborative research on Vortex 2. This was a huge grant, something in the neighborhood of $1 million grant. Right down here is the abstract they're asking from. And again, asking what motivates your grant. Okay, that's neat. So who wins awards? Well, in the most recent year I have data from, here are the 5 biggest awards. And you see most of them are schools. Most. Okay, so let's see. Oregon State got the biggest grant this year at $167 million. Holy God, that's a lot of money. What are they possibly spending on? Oh, they're building boats. Okay, $121 million went immediately to just building research vessels. And the next $2 million went to funding those things. And so we start to see the largest grant here is actually about $2 million for a new research, which was building a wave basin to see how things interacted. A perpetual thing is the University Corporation for Atmospheric Research, which are my people, and we get basically money for running the models of the country. So you can see that sometimes grants actually are budgets as well. So there's not as much money as you think here, and it is highly competitive. Now, in Missouri, we actually do okay in the NSF, $68 million for a mid, non-coastal, relatively low university state. We pull a decent amount of NSF money. So much so is due to our medical fields. That being said, most of the money here goes to obviously the MU, but not all. And I'm not interested in that. Let's look at what's happening here at UMKC directly. And as you can see over here, this is the ongoing research that's being funded right now in our city. And a lot of it does with both cyber infrastructure, okay, cool, and like actually talking about how does the university work down here at the bottom, right? But also on top, we have a biomechanics lab that's been funded. So right now, this is an ongoing question in Kansas City. And no matter where I look within our city, I can kind of use NSF grants to see more or less the interesting questions that are being asked. So here we are. SLU, apparently, one of the biggest questions is, how do we change how we teach engineers? And then we go into linguistics. And I don't know, it is interesting to me to see the kind of research that as a society and as taxpayers, our officials are saying, this is worth our time. But that's not interesting to you in this class, is it? You see, the actual question that's on your mind right now is, where is this going? And where this is going is you have another project coming up before your big project. And what that is isn't exactly clear to you yet. But if you haven't figured out that it's going to involve grant writing for at least part of it, you're in the wrong spot. So you're going to write a grant based on an abstract. Surprise. And it's going to be for something. Although what that something is, we'll talk about soon. What I want to do is introduce who you're going to be asking for money from, because if we can't ask NSF, and frankly we're not going to ask a private corporation because you're not going to be bringing something to market in an introductory research class, you're asking someone for money. So I want to introduce who they are and what they're going to do for us in this class. So unfortunately, one of the things I was hoping to do today, but that's really difficult to do through a video, is to bring in the person who's actually be funding our research here for the next bit of time. I reached out to him though, and he did agree to do a video interview, which I thought was very generous. And so what I'm going to do is just show you kind of the results of our conversation there, because I do think there's some details in here that matter to you in this class. So without further ado, I'm just going to clip that in here. So just to start off, before I say anything else, I want to say thank you. It really is an honor and a privilege to get to speak a little bit with you And kind of on behalf of my students, on behalf of Rockhurst, and on behalf of everyone involved in this project, I would be remiss to do anything besides start with the thanks. It's a honest gift of your time and resources that are allowing us to do this, and it's a privilege to get to speak with you a little bit. And because my students haven't met you before, it'd be really nice to just hear a little bit about who your organization is, what you're doing, why you would be interested in funding researchers, kind of how long you've been around, those kinds of things. I mean, we need a little background to understand those points. Additionally, I just want to remind you that like high school students haven't applied for grants before, so if you could walk us through that process a little bit, that'd be really helpful for us. What does it take to get a grant through your organization? What's the timeline look like? What kind of resources are available? Those kinds of things. And then any messages you'd like to give the students. Does that sound okay with you? So I want to thank you for such a warm introduction, and that sounds wonderful to me. So in case you don't know, I am the founder of MicroGrants. MicroGrants, we're a small-scale granting organization. We know we can't compete with the likes of, say, the National Science Foundation or NASA or things like that. They just have resources beyond our compare. That doesn't mean that what we do isn't important. We seek out science at the grassroots. We seek out science at the margins, and we ask, what can we do in the smallest ways possible to incite change on a grand level? We provide the money to seed small projects. You're never going to see us on the news as funding some revolutionary cancer study. But we still think what we do is important, and we want to open up our organization to high schoolers because well, we hear they're doing research at that level as well, and, well, they're high schoolers, they don't have any money, so we probably need to give them some resources to work with. So I'm happy to introduce what we do today. That sounds wonderful, and, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, I've honestly not met someone with any better eyebrows than that. That's amazing. So when we talk about this, MicroGrants, I think is pretty new, is that right? Absolutely. Actually, we just were founded earlier this year. I attended a conference and thought this was a good idea as a way of teaching students a little bit about how the scientific research project might work. We're still a new organization, and so there is some difficulty, but we found great success so far, and we're really hopeful about what we can do looking forward. And so we're really excited about the partnership with this class because we think there's some really, really amazing research you guys can carry out. So it sounds like to me that you're really interested in forming young scientists who have really had no exposure to research before, which is amazing for this class. I mean, it's exactly what we're looking for. That being said, it does leave me with a little bit of a question. I mean, if you have these resources, wouldn't they be better applied on, I don't know, more mature, more developed scientists who know how to pose a research question and seek an answer and who, frankly, can give you a higher return on your investment? I mean, just hypothetically, say a scientist was out there trying to study the fine detail of a mesovortex within a tornado using stereophotographic imaging. I mean, just a hypothetical research. Why would you not fund him and instead fund band of high school students? It just sounds unfair. I digress. Basically, why are you funding high school students? It's a bold strategy to be sure, but let's face it, most organizations already say the grant should go to the most deserving research project, the one that's presented best, and we know that. But we don't want to put ourselves into that rat race. We already know there's so much competition for the Nobel Prize laureates. We're not looking for one of them. We're just looking for someone to get our name out there right now. And let's face it, there's no one else in this market. I mean, what are you going to do? How many high school granting programs can you name? So that's part of it. We understand we're a young organization. We can come in here and really do something effective and change things from our base. And, we understand that reaching young people today is difficult. And, I actually had my crack team of marketers come together with something that appeals to the young millennial generation. And so if you don't mind rolling the footage, I think, honestly, this introduces who we are better than anything else. Yep, I mean, that was incredible. Uh, so what does the grant application process even look like? How do we go about joining you? How do we get a MU grant? Yes, so actually the grants are exceedingly easy to get. If you ever applied for a grant before, it's basically the same process. I mean, just make an application, we'll accept or deny it. I mean, that's really good news and certainly sounds accessible. I do want to remind you, though, that these students haven't actually applied for a grant before, and they don't really know what it entails. They can't even write abstracts. I mean, let's look at them. And so if you don't mind giving them a little more detail on, like, well, what's it actually entail to get a grant through MU Grants, that probably would be helpful for us. Well, so a grant proposal just includes what it is you're trying to ask and why it's important to the world. Why are you doing this research? What do you need from us to make that research work? We're not asking hard questions here. What we want to know is how awesome your research is going to be and how we can help you get there. Okay? What I can't do is answer the questions for you or say, well, this is what I want you to do. But if you come to me and say, I've got this idea and here's how I'm going to do it, I'll listen. I may not fund you, but I'll listen. That's the point of us. And if we think there's some merit to your ideas, we might throw a little money your way. Or not. That's all we do. Great. Do you have any literature or documents that could help my students better submit their ideas to you? Things that kind of guide them through this process to make, I don't know, your life a little easier so their ideas are more readable, their lives a little more easy so they're not producing unnecessary documents, that kind of thing? Yes, I think they sent along a document binder to you earlier today. If you don't mind going through there, I think it's called Figure B or Figure C. If you could find that really fast for me, that would be a lot easier to look through together. Oh yeah, I think I've got it here. 1 second. Let me see. Let's find it here. You said B or C, I think. Getting close. I think this is it here. It's just a picture of a cat that says "suck it" on it. Are you sure that's the right document? Yes, that's the one. I'll be sure to keep that in mind. Is there anything else in that big binder that might be of use to us, or is it all just cat pictures? I mean, I'll remind you that I'm a scientist, and if you're insinuating that cat pictures aren't important, this conversation is probably close to over. Oh, not at all. I've been curating my own collection for years. I'm just asking, is there anything else that we could use as some guiding documents? You know, nothing comes off the top of my head, but if you want to go through that binder, you might find something useful in there. If you do, feel free to give it to the students, but honestly, this is a pretty straightforward process, as I've said. You're just applying for a grant. How hard could it be? Thanks. I'll be certain to do that. Before we go, if you don't mind giving me a little more detail about the kinds of projects you fund and what you're most interested in, I think that will be very helpful in focusing our next research questions. So we do acknowledge that collaboration is the key to modern science. So we don't accept any individual grant proposals. We only accept work between at least 3 scientists. It's just something that we do to keep building the next generation of young scientists best. We're interested in problems that address some question. We hope they solve a need within the community, but frankly, if we have a demonstrated need for this question to be asked, we'll consider that important enough. Just the group needs to state their purpose quite clearly to us. That sounds really great to me. And in terms of application timelines, when does your granting window open and close? When can we start making applications as a class? Well, we start accepting applications somewhere around the Halloween time frame. We're not exactly sure or too important. Send them in when you've got them time. As we need, we need a little bit of time for review. I can't give you a great timeline on when you'll hear back, but we'll process your applications as soon as our organization sees fit. That's really soon, but that sounds wonderful. I know we were thinking about doing another research project here within the next few weeks, and so I'm sure that we can collaborate in some way. And what kind of resources does MicroGrants have for our school? What could we ask of you? Yes, as I said, we are a relatively new organization. As such, our resources are somewhat limited. We can provide manufacturing space and storage space, as well as small consumable budgets for devices or supplies. We're really interested in the consumables. We can't provide overarching funding, but we can be the bridge between idea and finished product. Wonderful, thank you. I really do want to thank you again for such a memorable interview and your time. It flew by. I felt like I was talking to myself. But as things go, I do know that I want to respect your time and you have other things to do. Is there anything closing you'd like to say before I say goodbye here? Any other messages you'd like to relay to the students? No, we are really looking forward to this collaboration with your class, and I am hopeful to see the research proposals they give me here soon. I would encourage them again to look at our logo. I think we'll put it up on the screen here. And you can see that we're interested in the questions that light up new ideas. And remember, here at MicroGrants, we've got money from you. Well, thank you again, and I look forward to hearing more from you soon. Likewise, it's been a pleasure, so I look forward to seeing more of your class's work soon. Bye. All right, so my life is something of a joke. So you're watching this now. I'm on a beach in San Diego. Honestly, I'm probably on the better side of this. In summary, what I'm actually asking you to do will be to write to my granting application to do any research at all. Last time you had to submit a proposal, that's great in terms of procedure. That's not what this is after. I'm after, is your research even worth my time? Our time as a school, should we fund what you're doing or not? Now, you don't know what you're asking about yet, and I'll talk about what that is soon. But I will be reviewing, along with several other members of our school, what you asked for and deciding if it's worthy or not. And that will be the next part of this game. I could make videos and sit here and lecture you for days and weeks on grant writing. That's not the point of this class. The point is to learn through doing. So this is it. I'm not going to give you a whole lot more guidance. Now, I happened to go through the binder that he mentioned in the video, and I did find one document that will guide us a little bit more than, something that looks like one of these lines. But, it's not a lot of help, I'll warn you. It's blue. You'll get it passed out here in a moment. The other thing you're going to get is an excerpt from a book, and that book's title will show up on the screen here in a moment. This is a short history of nearly everything, and it's the history of science, and frankly, you're all big enough nerds in this room to really enjoy this book. The writing is fantastic, and the story is entertaining, and we're going to jump around, but this is going to be our main text for the rest of this quarter. Last time we looked at ignition, and maybe some of you failed to look at ignition. This time we're really interested in how did scientists do science? And the stories here are amazing. So I'm asking you to read this one a little more carefully than last time. It is certainly so much easier than the first writing that I asked you to do. The reading here is going to be over the history of atoms and elements. It's a chemistry reading. Why did I choose that one? Because it's something you're very familiar with from your general chemistry class. Now, it's not the only reading I'm going to assign from this, and do not think this is only a chemistry class. The next class is unfortunately going to be, at least the next reading is going to be about biology, and it's going to be tedious, but I thought we'd balance it out with some elements to start. So, we can kind of say, well, Bill Bryson's book isn't worthless, right? If I start with the biology, I wouldn't pick it up again. So as we look at this reading, though, I do think it's really worth seeing the story of the people behind what they did, because as we start looking towards, okay, what's our big research really going to be? What are we really going to be doing next semester? What is it that really drives me to ask bigger questions? I think it is good to look at the shoulders we stand on, and I just don't know a better work than this one. And again, Bryson's writing has always been entertaining, and in this book is fantastic. So all I'm going to ask you to do for the rest of the period today, you don't have to do any more grant writing or abstract writing. Your cyanotype journal's been turned into me and is done, or if not, you're panicking and finishing it now. Oh my God, you got till 3 p.m. Let's go. And the lights will turn off or whatever. That's dramatic, I guess, because that's like the lights turning off on your grade that would happen if you don't turn in your journal. Dramatic now. As things go, though, I'm asking you basically just to take the time to enjoy the Bryson reading over break, or a couple days here after break. I will, when I get back from San Diego and see you on Tuesday, guide you a little bit onto what we're doing next, how we're doing next. But for now, that's all I'm going to ask of you. So for now, have a great day. Thanks for your attention. I know videos are always difficult, so hopefully this one was at least somewhat entertaining. And yeah, if I don't see you again in a video tomorrow, depends on what I decide to do after I'm done making this one. Have a great break. And if I see you tomorrow, well, then I'll wish you the same then. So, ciao, buen camino.